Headed on our Lewis Automotive Hotline, Friday morning conversation. Aaron Torres joining us from the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, Aaron Torres Media, AT. Good morning. Happy Halloween. Happy Game 6. Another week of college football. College basketball's here, man. We finally get real games that count next week. Hey, what do you when you watch any exhibition basketball game? When you look at the box scores, do you take these games with a grain of salt?
Listen. This is going to sound like a very arrogant thing for me to say, and I don't intend it that way. I kind of have a feel for most of these teams, how they're supposed to look, who's supposed to be playing and in what role, right? And so, as an example, last night, there's a certain team that wears blue that got smacked at home by Georgetown. And I think, listen, let's call a spade a spade. Kentucky's former head coach is now sitting in Arkansas. Arkansas looked awesome in their first two exhibitions. And, if Arkansas fans want to have fun with that result, I have no problem with it. I also know that Jalen Lowe, who is one of the best players in the transfer portal this year at point guard, was not available. And then, basically, his backup wasn't available. And if you watched the game, and I did watch that game specifically, you say, oh, Kentucky kind of looked like a team without a point guard. They literally just could not run offense functionally. And so I bring it up to say, I took more out of, say, that game that, hey, Georgetown might actually be pretty good, then it's oh, there's some functional, something wrong with Kentucky. Conversely, my UConn Huskies played Michigan State the other night without two starters and looked awesome. And they won by about 8, 10, 12 points. And to me, Michigan State had what we believe to be basically their full roster. And so you say, okay, so even if it was at home, UConn just beat Michigan State without two starters, and how much of the quote-unquote offense is really being – it doesn't really matter. So the point I'm trying to make is I actually do think – I think it's become this cliche thing of, you can't take anything out of exhibitions. Well – I'm sorry, I do. And, I think – I'm going long, but I'll just wrap it with this. I saw Seth Davis the other day say this, is you don't want to overreact to exhibitions, okay, but you don't want to take nothing out of them when there is stuff to take out of. And so I could go on and on, but to me, I think you have to find that balance of everybody wants to say you can't take anything away from exhibitions, okay, but let's not take nothing away either at a time when, in cases where we should be taking at least something away.
Makes sense. All right. Well, we get games that count next week.
I said, not all, though.
No, that does make sense. But the thing that Matt hits on is that you really get a sense of a team's athleticism at the very least. And, they can't take that away from Arkansas.
Well, especially with Coach Cal, the way he coaches, he lets these guys – because if you look at a Coach Cal the last 20 years, his teams are very athletic. And so it's almost like he kind of lets them make mistakes being athletes, and then he's teaching them how to be a basketball player. I love the way his process is that he goes about it.
Matt, I love that. That's, listen, you played at a much higher level than I did, but – everyone who's been around him, that's perfect analysis. And I even remember going into the summer, 2 summers ago when Cal was taking over, and it was all kind of new for most everybody except for, Big Z, DJ, and Adu Thero. Cal did this kind of rant where he just said, listen, summertime is about making you the best version of yourself, and that's a lot of skill work, that's a lot of whatever. And then we figure out the team stuff as time goes on. And I think that's absolutely right, Matt, is that, you bring in guys that have the physical tools, and then, again, you worry about the skill stuff, and I think more importantly, the team stuff afterward. I think that's where he's got a lot of criticism is how come you're not beating this team on November 28th? And it's well, isn't the end game still March? And I think that I'll be honest, I think that message kind of wore thin by the end at the last place. But it's a tried and true method, and the one thing you can't deny about Cal, whether it's from UMass to Memphis to Kentucky to Arkansas, is his teams play their best basketball usually from about February 1st on. As a matter of fact, take out the COVID year. I'd have to really go back and think about it, but I can't really think of a year where the team wasn't actually playing really good basketball February into March. Now, sometimes they had dug themselves, like last year, such a big hole where, you have a lot of ground to make up. But the way you framed it is exactly right, Matt, and I agree 100%. I do think athleticism is one thing that can be taken away, and I think that's what's a positive sign about that Arkansas game against Memphis on Monday. Another one that I watched is that it wasn't perfect early, but they really just kind of overwhelmed a team basically the final 20 to 25 minutes of that game. And one thing about Memphis under Penny Hardaway, they're never going to be lacking athleticism as well. So from the Arkansas side, we can absolutely, do any more takeaways you want. But I think that's my biggest takeaway is that, just the athleticism and the number of bodies this year, which is obviously different than last year, I think it puts them in a great position when we're talking about teams that are really going to be, at the top of the sport all year long.
Hey, this has been a crazy week specifically at LSU athletics. You don't need me to get into the reasons why, but I saw the committee.
Is your guys' governor making the next football hire too, or is that just a Louisiana thing?
That's probably just a Louisiana thing. That's right. The thing I was going to get into with that is man, I kind of forgot my train of thought when you cut in there for a moment, AT. No, has the job been diminished? That's what I was getting into. Has the job been diminished? They've got an actually pretty good committee, it looks like, to put together to hire the next coach. It's not the former athletic director, but the guy who's been their administrator for football for years, who's now the AD for now, the interim, Verge Osbury. He's on this committee along with a former player. But has the job been diminished by what's happened in the last week, or because we're kind of kicking around the idea that that's maybe the best job available, and then Governor Landry spoke.
He did speak. He certainly spoke. By the way, I apologize for cutting you off there, but that is, I think the $64,000 question that everybody, I've been, I was on in College Station yesterday, I was on in Tuscaloosa yesterday, and I'm on in Fayetteville now, and I think that might be honestly the biggest question in the SEC right now, because we all know what LSU is capable of being when they have the right coach, or at least a coach that kind of knows how to take advantage of all those resources. I'll be honest, guys, I am not as worried about it as I think maybe some people are. Listen, there's two variables. One, the way the world moves, we're going to all move on to the next thing. I'm not wishing this upon somebody, but let's say Auburn loses to Kentucky at home tomorrow. We could have another SEC opening by Monday. You just never know. And we're going to forget about all that. I think the governor is going to kind of fade into the background. It's clear he had a bone to pick with the AD. And then I don't think it's going to matter as much. And then I do think the other thing is that basically it's such a good job that I think anybody that's in football, and especially that really understands the college landscape, understands what you are capable of doing there. So I don't think it's as big of a deal. But what I will say is this, and it's for all these jobs, right, is that if you don't get Lane Kiffin, I mean, who is the guy that moves the needle with the fan base? I'll tell you really a quick side story, but, Penn State, there's increasing buzz that they could be hiring. Now, I don't think it's anywhere near done, but a conversation being had is Brian Hartline, the OC at Ohio State, and the thought process there is he understands the Big Ten. He's a great recruiter, offensive guy, whatever. But it's like when you fire a coach in James Franklin that won, basically 70% of his games if you take out his first year, I don't know that that's the guy that everybody in the building was ready to rally around on, October 5th or whatever when they fired him. And so I do think that's going to be an interesting thing with LSU is, let's just say for the sake of argument, Lane Kiffin signs an extension tomorrow and he's completely off the board. John Summerall Tulane just lost last night. Whatever. I mean, Marcus Freeman's not coming. So it's like, who is that guy? And so I think that's what makes it more interesting. I still think it is the best job. I think people in football understand that. But I think the counter to that is, how many of those people are really attainable? And then of the ones that are, how much are they going to potentially rally your fan base?
And I don't have any info, but I see Rhett Lashlee, the head coach at SMU, being the next LSU head coach. I think that would be a great spot for him. I guess my question to you, Aaron, is which coach would you want to lead your program? Would it be Jimmy Franklin or would it be Brian Kelly? Who gets back into coaching at a better job first?
It's a great question. I think to me it's no doubt James Franklin. And listen, I think, the more it's funny, I saw some pictures. It's so funny. Like, you see stuff online these days and you don't know what's real, what's AI, what's made up, what's whatever. I saw some pictures of James Franklin today, and I didn't share them because I don't know if they're real. But you know what? The vibe that I got, guys, I got the Calipari in Arkansas vibe, where if it was real, and I think it was, big smile on his face, and I think that guy, one, I think he sincerely wants to coach. I don't think it's a money grab. And two, he was really good, but it was also a place where it probably had come full circle and it was time for everybody to get a fresh start. No different than John Calipari with his situation. And listen, I think Arkansas is happy with how that worked out. I think Kentucky's happy with how that worked out. And I think someone is going to land James Franklin and get a reinvigorated guy that really probably just did need a fresh start. Brian Kelly, on the other hand, I'll just say, like, I've actually always been an advocate of his. I tell the story all the time, but, he came to Cincinnati when I was at UConn, and, Cincinnati was good under Mark D'Antonio, who was the former Michigan State head coach, and he really took him to another level. And so I've always kind of defended him, but you could tell there was a disconnect. You can tell that, frankly, the players didn't like him. Probably the assistant coaches who were getting screamed at didn't like him. And I don't know, like, if he wants to coach, somebody is going to hire him, and probably he'll be pretty good there. I think it can't be I'm going long, so if I'm going too long, please cut me off. But I wonder, frankly, what kind of job he would take, right? I mean, he has been at two jobs in the last 15 years that you basically get whatever you need to compete at the highest level. So if a Michigan State opens, if a Wisconsin opens, yeah, geographically it makes the most sense. It makes more sense than LSU. But does it really make sense for Brian Kelly, who's been at Notre Dame and LSU the last 15 years? So I think, to me, yes, I think somebody is getting a good football coach if he decides to get back in it. I think what I'm kind of curious in is what is the threshold of job that he's willing to take, because that, to me, is kind of the fascinating conversation with him.
You don't always win your first bet. That's why MyBookie has you covered. Use our code HOGS, H-O-G-S, and your first bet up to $500 is fully covered. If your pick doesn't hit, you get it right back with our Bet Back bonus. Go to MyBookie.ag and use the code HOGS to claim your Bet Back bonus. MyBookie's, where bettors win together, because bragging's good, but cashing in is better. And your first bet is fully covered. Use our code HOGS.
Must opt in during the bet to use the Bet Back bonus.